You may be seated, and I'd like to invite all the kids to come forward. By the way, this is Pastor Danira. So, say hi, Pastor Danira.
Thank you. Hello. Okay, you all are the children today. I come from two different backgrounds. The first is Native American and the second is Mexican. And I'm going to share to you a little bit from the Native American background. In the time before this and the time before that, in a time so long ago, almost everyone has forgotten, there was Creator who creates just by thinking. And Creator who creates just by thinking had made this beautiful world. And this world was filled with many different kinds of people. There were the winged ones, and there were those that swim. There were those that crawl, and there were the four-leggeds. And until in a time yet to come, Creator would also bring the two-leggeds. But this was still in a time before the two-leggeds had been created. Each one of the people that Creator had made had something very special about them. Something that set them apart, both as people as well as individuals. And there was this one winged person who had been gifted with an amazing ability to fly. In fact, she flew so quickly from one place to another that all of the other people gave her the name which became hers, She Who Flies Swiftly. It was a wonderful thing to watch She Who Flies Swiftly zip from one place to another, almost as though by magic. And yet, it was by design. She Who Flies Swiftly gloried in her ability. And in that glory, she gave all of her praise to Creator. For it was Creator who had given her her wings, and who had given her her feathers, had given her her lightness and her speed. But one day, instead of taking a zig, she took a zag. And in that moment, She Who Flies Swiftly came to a very abrupt stop. And hitting the trunk of a tree, she fell to the ground. Stunned, she shook herself off a little bit, laughed a little bit, and then jumped into the air to once again start her trek across the woods. But no, this time, instead of going up into the air, she fluttered back down to the ground with pain in one of her wings. And instead of being able to open it out the way the other one did, this one folded and it would not straighten. She Who Flies Swiftly, for the first time in her memory, could not fly. She called out to Creator, Creator, help me, heal me. For Creator had always been the one to give her her strength to answer her call. But Creator was silent. And She Who Flies Swiftly waited. Again, she thought, if I try hard enough, this wing will straighten out. And so she tried again and again to straighten out the wing, but it wouldn't. Again and again, she jumped up into the air, but each time it seemed to cause more pain for her. And so she settled down into the grass and into the leaves for the night. The next morning, once again, she called out to Creator. And once again, she lifted herself up and jumped into the air. But once again, with pain, she fell back down. The other people of the woods came around her to see why she who flies swiftly was not inhabiting the air. And they commiserated with her. They felt for her. They encouraged her. They sat with her. They brought her food. But she who flies swiftly remained earthbound. Over time, some of those who had come to be with her stopped coming. Others came to see this curiosity on the ground. Ah, it was she who flies swiftly before, but who is she now? And so, time went by. The pain increased. And she who flies swiftly's voice was raised more plaintively, daily, hourly. And still, her prayers for healing were not answered. After a while, many forgot about she who flies swiftly as they went about their daily lives. But she who flies swiftly did not forget Creator. She kept lifting her voice. And soon, instead of becoming a cry of pain, it became a song that she would lift up to Creator. And soon, the rest of the woods not only heard her song going up, they also heard Creator's response coming down. At first, they didn't know what it was, because they had not heard it before. It was a melody that was lovely, one going up, another melody coming down. And yet, in the melodies, they intertwined in such a beautiful way that neither was alone. She who flies swiftly. She was never the same again. Never again did she fly up in the air. But the people of the woods soon came around to see her, to be with her, to watch her, and to listen. Not because of her speed, not because of the height to which she could go, but rather because of the song. And soon the people of the wood gave her a new name. No longer she who flies swiftly, they renamed her she who has been healed. It is the way that it was. It is the way that it still is today. Aho.
And I'd like to invite Danira.
Thank you.
And hopefully you'll tell us a little bit about your ministry in these areas.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So I'd like to share with you the words of Scripture. Are they going to be printed up there?
Yes.
Okay. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. Paul gives advice to a lot of people. Children, which we all are, to fathers, to slaves, which sometimes we all feel like slaves in the work that we do. In our culture, we might say, instead of slaves, employees, to employers. Do what you do with respect for God. Everything with respect for God. Now, I have to tell you, I was raised in the church. I knew those verses. But when it came right down to it, my relationship with my mother was not the best. Dad didn't exasperate me. My mother did. You see, I grew up as a daddy's girl, and I have a younger brother who grew up as a mama's boy. And so at 18 years old, when I decided that it was time for me to try out my wings in an almost literal way, I decided I was going to go skydiving. I lived in Arizona, and I found out that there was a place out in the desert where I could go skydiving for $55 if I had 19 of my closest friends and family members go with me. You see, normally it cost $110 to go skydiving, but if you got 20 people to get onto that plane, we could all go for $55 a piece. And then, I'm a top-notch negotiator. I worked it out so that if we got 20 people going at $55 each, I would get to go for free. 21 people on this plane, going up 10,000 feet into the air and of their own volition jumping out of the plane. At 18, I thought it was a good idea. And so I contacted everybody that I knew, and I was able to get 19. I wanted that free jump. Let me tell you, I was ready to sell my soul for that free jump. So instead, I got my little brother to agree to go. Of course, Jaime, being 16 years old at the time, was barely over the minimum age to be able to go skydiving with parental permission. There was the rub. Jaime, being a mama's boy, he knew who he was going to go to get to sign that permission slip, and it was, of course, Mom. He went to Mom, brought her the permission slip, and I told Jaime, look, Jaime, I will pay for half of your fee to go if you come up with the other half, because then, my free one would only be half of 55. We got it all worked out. Went to Mom. Mom said, there is no way. And she told him the story of his premature birth and the story of how he almost killed her. And I don't think she meant it figuratively. And that she was not going to risk her baby, the youngest in the family, to go out of an airplane. She said, I did not give you birth for you to do that. You're not going. Jaime came back to me right away, and I said, give me that permission slip. And I took it, and I went to Dad. And I said, Dad, I've got this opportunity. I'd really like to go, but I want to take Jaime with me. My father's signature on that piece of paper almost started World War III in our household. Gentlemen, always ask Mama first. But I had that piece of paper. It was like gold, and I was not going to give it up no matter what. And so on the early morning in which we were going to go out into the desert, we had to leave the house at 4 o'clock in the morning. And Mom said to me, he better not get hurt. Because if he gets hurt, don't even bother coming home. She was that angry. Now, we all know, moms say sometimes some things that they don't really mean. But believe me, I thought she really meant it. I needed to take care of my little brother and make sure that nothing happened to him. And so we took off. 4 o'clock in the morning. Try to get a teenager up at 4 o'clock in the morning. We were motivated because nobody had to wake us up. We go out into the desert with all the rest of our friends going out there too, and we started the training. The training started with one step, where you had to just jump down one step and learn how to tuck and roll. I will not demonstrate it for you because I will break a hip at this point in my life. But you have to have your feet together, and here's what they told us. Feet together, ankles together, knees together. Put a little bit of a bend in your knees. You jump, you go forward, roll over your right shoulder, and then you're done. Then you go up a second step and do the jump, tuck and roll. They take you up to the third step, do the jump, tuck and roll. And by the time we were at the fourth step, we knew we would be ready. We did the jump, tuck and roll, except that when I did the jump, tuck and roll, I didn't do the jump, tuck and roll. I did the jump, fall forward and flat on your face. I hit my right knee, and it started to swell up. They didn't know that it was swelling up because they had put us into jumpsuits. But I knew it was swelling up. And then I started limping. And the instructor said, let me see that knee. And so there I am, pulling up that jumpsuit pant, and my knee was so fat. And he said, you're done. And I said, no, I can't be done. He says, you're done. If I let you go up on that plane and you jump and you don't tuck and roll, He says, you're going to break a leg. You're done. 20 people went up on that plane, and I stayed on the ground. Somebody loaned me a pair of binoculars, and I said to Jaime as he was getting on the plane, I said, Jaime, be the last one, because I want to know that it's you as I'm watching you with those binoculars coming down off of that plane. And so he promised me he would be the last one. He talked to the instructor. The instructor said, not a problem. He'll be the last one. And so there I am on the ground waiting for the plane to hit 10,000 feet. Once it got to 10,000 feet, they started coming off. And I'm watching with those binoculars and I'm counting 1, 2, 3, and getting all the way to number 19. And all of those little parachutes are opening up and they tell you how to guide it so that you can hit that target on the ground. Then comes number 20, and I'm excited for him. I'm really sad for me, but I'm excited. Jaime, my little brother, he's coming down. And I'm watching him, and it opens up this little chute, and he's slowly drifting down. And I'm looking at him, and there's Jaime with his legs spread apart. Now, they did say, keep your knees together, keep your ankles together, because if you go down with your legs spread apart, you're going to break a leg. And so I'm shouting instructions to this young man, nearly 9,000 feet up into the air, and then at 8,000, I'm going, Jaime, put your legs together. Put your legs together. And of course, he can't hear me, but he's coming down, and his legs are not together. And I'm just willing for him to hear me. Put your legs together. Don't look down. Look out into the horizon. And he's just not doing it. Not doing it. Everybody else has finished their tucks and rolls. And here's Jaime coming down, legs wide apart. And I know that he's going to break his leg, I'm going to take him to the hospital, and I'm going to be out on my ear. Because I'm going to bring my mother's son home with a broken leg. Jaime hits the ground, and now I'm saying, tuck and roll, tuck and roll. But he doesn't tuck and roll. He hit the ground the way I did when I went off the 4-foot jump. He went flat on his face. The parachute still billowed open. Just at that moment, this gust of hot desert air comes across the desert, continues to fill his parachute, and now Jaime is being dragged across the desert behind a parachute, and he's going off the sand and into the scrub brush. Ever been to Arizona? Ever seen the scrub brush? Let's see, prickly pear cactus, cholla cactus, saguaro cactus, it's all there. And Jaime is being dragged through it. You would think that a parachute would get caught on cactus and be able to just deflate. But no, it doesn't. Not when you've got Arizona wind sailing it through the air, and Jaime's being dragged behind it. Already, a couple of guys had gotten into a Jeep and were chasing after my 16-year-old brother down the desert. They actually went ahead, past his body being dragged, and one of the guys jumped out and jumped onto the chute and pushed it down, while the other one finally reached Jaime, stopped the Jeep and ran after Jaime, and took here and pulled on a buckle. And that buckle then released the chute on one side so that the one who was on the parachute could get it to stop sailing across the desert. I'm watching all of this with those binoculars, wholly and completely invested in my little brother, mostly because of my own skin. And I'm wondering, did he break a leg? Because up to this point, I really don't know. The one fella rolls up the parachute while the other fellow helps my brother get up, and they get him into the Jeep and they start to come back. And I'm just waiting on pins and needles to find out. Well, it's a good thing that Jaime was wearing a jumpsuit, one of those that completely covers your arms and your legs. It was a good thing he was wearing a helmet, because the only scratches on Jaime were on his face, his neck. He even had gloves on. Didn't break a leg, didn't have any problem up there, except for the one thing that we learned about Jaime on that particular jump. He gets airsick. And while he was in that plane, a combination of nerves and a big breakfast became his biggest problem. And apparently, he threw up on the way down. Good thing he was the one wearing the parachute. Here's why I'm telling you this story. We did everything wrong. Everything. First of all, not having two parents that were in agreement about what their kids should do. But that wasn't the only thing we did wrong. Wanting to have our own way, we did it wrong. Being more invested in my needs than in my brother's needs, did that wrong too. Being generous and kind to my brother, as in paying half of his ticket, but not doing it for him, really. I was doing it for me. I'd say I did that wrong too. Coming down from the airplane, legs apart, Jaime jumped wrong. My concern for him, that he not break a leg, it was partly about him, but I still say it's more about me. Did that one wrong too. And yet, in all of this, we had help. Throughout the whole thing, there was help. Help from the 19 other people who agreed to go skydiving. Help from the trainer who taught us how to do the skydiving. Help from the pilot who took them all the way up there. Help from the individual who was inside that plane, who told them the only way you're getting out is through that door, so that even when you don't want to go, because you've made the commitment to go, you're going. Help from the Jeep driver and his buddy who caught my brother and kept him from sailing to Las Vegas. Help from the guys who kept that Jeep in really great running order. There was help all along the way. See, one of the things that I learned there was especially the last part of those verses. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I had made this about flesh and blood. I had made it about my relationship with Mom and my relationship with Dad. I had made it about what I wanted. I'd made it about flesh and blood. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and authorities and spiritual forces There's so much more going on around us, within us, that we don't always see. That the conflict before us isn't about the person that you're arguing with or the person that you are standing up against. That person is just the pawn that's being used. The spiritual forces that are inside and around are so much stronger that in every conflict there is a spiritual component. Every conflict. And it may be the spiritual component within and around that other person, but it's also the spiritual component that's within you and around you. That choice that I made caused conflict between my parents. That didn't die down quickly or easily. But there was a spiritual conflict there. My relief at my brother not having a broken leg was actually subsumed a little bit later on as I was berating him for not putting his legs together. And I was in the middle of a spiritual conflict there based on my fear. The scripture says, fathers, don't exasperate your children, but I don't think it only applies to fathers. Let's not exasperate each other, but we do. Because we don't talk about it, because we don't listen about it. The psalmist asks the question, from whence cometh my help? And then answers it, my help cometh from the Lord. And yet too often in our exasperation, in our anger, in our rage, in our miscommunications, we are not ready to go to the Lord to get help. And so God has to send that help in a Jeep, in a trainer, in a relationship. Because we're not always ready to hear the music, the voice of God as we are sending our plaintive cries to Him. And we're so focused on, what do I need? What do I want? How do I get through this? That we miss that God is healing us, growing us, changing us by the very thing that we are so exasperated about. That this trial, this temptation, this person, this difficulty, this challenge is the very thing that is bringing about the healing of our souls, the healing of our characters, the healing of our personalities. Embrace the problems. Embrace the people who punch your buttons. Embrace the difficulties, because it is in those people, in those problems, in those difficulties that God is healing us in ways that we didn't even know that we needed healing. Mom and Dad worked it out. Jaime and I worked it out. I didn't get to go skydiving that time. I was 18. Almost 40 years later, my dad and I were getting things ready for Mom and Dad to be moving. And Dad said, come on, let's go. And Dad and I would sometimes just take off and go get something to eat somewhere. And so I thought, okay, we're going out to eat. He drove us to a little tiny airport near Tucson, Arizona. And I said, Dad, what are we doing here? I thought maybe we were going to be plane watching. And he says, we're going skydiving. And I said, what? $150 to go skydiving. My father was 70 years old. Oh, excuse me, 75. We shelled out $300. And the two of us went through the training. They didn't ask us to jump off of a 4-foot step anymore. What they did was give us the jumpsuits, put on the harness, no parachute, because we were doing a tandem dive. And so each one of us got a big strapping young man instead of a parachute. And those strapping young men had the parachutes. And there we were. Instead of in a large plane that could fit 21 people, it was a little Cessna with all of the seats taken out except for the pilot's seat. And the four of us crammed ourselves into that little Cessna. And I was under the dash. And when we got up to about 10,000 feet, it was cold up there. And the guy behind me opened up the door and hooked himself to my harness on the back. And he said, ma'am, don't you hate it when they call you ma'am? Tells you how old you are. Ma'am, you need to put your foot on the step. And I said, you're kidding. And he said, no, you need to put your foot on the step. I said, I am so frozen and tucked underneath this dash, I can't do that. And so he helped me. He grabbed me by the shoulder straps and yanked me up. Told you he was strapping. And he said, let me help you. And took my leg and put it out onto that little tiny step. And with his head right here by this ear, he said, jump. And when he said jump, he pushed me out of the plane. And I screamed. And all of a sudden, all I could hear was my scream. And then I stopped. Because it was the most amazing sensation. Everything got quiet. I couldn't hear the plane anymore. It was gone. And I could see forever. Because in Arizona, you can see for miles and miles. It was incredible. And we weren't moving. There was no wind rushing by my head. Nothing. It was like floating, very slowly floating, and it was incredible. And I said to him, how fast are we going? And I don't even remember the number that he told me of how many miles per hour we were actually falling down to the ground, because it was quiet and it was beautiful and it lasted a lifetime. And yet, in almost a split second, he was telling me to lift my legs up into a sitting down position so that he could put his feet down and gently set me down as well. I may never, ever do that again. Because let me tell you, that moment of fear of putting my foot on that step and being shoved out of a plane was almost as palpable as the beauty of coming down. I couldn't have done that without help. Truth is, there's nothing that any of us can do without help. Where does your help come from? No matter what kind of help you get, your help comes from the Lord. Let us pray. Papa, thank you so much because you give us all the help that we need in all the ways that we need it. When the Jeep comes for us, when the instructor is there, when you ask us to be silent and listen, when you give us words of encouragement, whatever way that you reach into us, you provide the help. And we thank you, Lord, for making it so real to us. Let it be even more real to us that we can see your hand in everything, in every help that we receive, so that we may be able to stand when that day comes, when we are put up against the spiritual forces of evil. That because we are standing in you through Jesus, we will be able to stand. Let it be so. Amen.